And good evening, everybody. How are we doing this October 4th in the evening here in the U.S.? Finally getting some cooler fall weather, which is exciting because it's been bloody hot out here in the Midwest. So, how's everybody doing? I see everyone's settling in. Pixel 5 rocking some coffee. I like it. A little late for coffee myself. So, as I figure out which one of these devices is not silenced, let's go over today's topic. We're going to talk about LED lighting, pretty much everything you need to know when you're shopping and looking for different lights. And the scene is constantly changing. We're about to enter all-out RGB land, so that will be pretty interesting. Right, so before we do that, quick little news rundown / what's coming up here on the channel. I've got a lot of lens stuff coming up, so a lot of budget lenses, some other fun stuff, lots of lights. I mean, I'm just kind of turning into the light guy, I guess. I just really enjoy lights. I feel like if you're going to invest some money into equipment, lighting is going to give you the biggest bang per buck and really separate you from everybody else. Hey, lots of comments coming in. What's going on? Sweet, thanks for the intro comment there, Pixel 5. We got a lot of people in so far from Greece, Germany, Austria, Bulgaria, Chicago, Greece again. Sweet. Norway. Amazing. You guys are ridiculous. So yeah, we're going to have a bunch of light stuff coming up. I also have a bunch of gimbals in. And what I'm going to do is have a good friend of mine who really knows his stuff with gimbals help me out with that. Because I, work a little bit with gimbals, but not nearly as much as he does. So that'll be a lot of fun. Lots of good stuff there, and I will be doing some live lighting tutorials. So I'm working on setting up a wireless camera system for these live streams. I'll be able to go into the other room in the studio, set it down, and we can start from scratch and start playing with some lighting. So I'm really excited about that, and then on the fly I can get questions from you guys, which will be a lot of fun. So that's what's coming up. A bunch of other stuff as well. It's going to be great. Stick around on the channel. And today we're going to jump into the LED or lighting world. Most of it's going to be mainly LEDs, the topic for today. But, some of this will apply to non-LED lights as well. So before I jump into what I have prepared here when it comes to lights, Oh, Australia, not Austria. I apologize. Sydney Short Film School. I should have figured that one out. Right on. So, what do you guys usually light? Just to get a kind of ballpark here. Are you guys doing documentary work, corporate work, weddings, YouTube videos? What kind of stuff are you guys shooting? And this will kind of help me sort of tailor this a little further. And once we get through all these topics, we'll go down to specific uses and some scenarios where you should definitely not do this or you should definitely get this. Right on. I guess the stream is going to catch up here in a second, but let me guys know what you guys shoot, and that'll help me kind of get this dialed in for you guys, since this is for you guys, not just, random folk. So let's jump in with the first item, corporate and weddings. Okay. What lighting for wedding receptions? Let's come back to that football. Awesome question. Lots of wedding, corporate docs, mostly corporate. Okay, interviews, awesome. That's good to know. So I'm just going to go through lots of things that are involved when choosing lights, and you'll see some of these, and I'll help you figure out what to look for. So number one is going to be output. This is measured usually in one of two ways. Look at first for lumens. So you'll see something like 3,000 lumens at 3 meters. Most, and I say most, not everybody, but hopefully and most of the time you will find a reading and a readout for lumens when you're shopping for lights, and it'll usually be a consistent one is 3 meters. So if you already have some lights and you see the readout for those, you're going to begin to get a vibe for, okay, this many lumens at 3 meters is good enough, or ooh, that's less than what I'd like to see. So lumens is the best one. Again, these might not be accurate depending on what people are using to measure, but lumens is the best. The next one I look at, and often you'll see this one in the title of the light, is watts. Now, this is a little tricky. Watts usually is the draw of power for the light. So it's not necessarily everything that's going to the actual output, but it still is a great starting place. So that's usually the first thing I look for if I can't find lumens, is watts. So 150 watt light, that's really bright. This light right here, the Aperture 120D or 120T, sorry about that, rip everyone with my headphones. This is 120 watts. So this is a crazy bright light. So if you're into the 100 and plus, you're really banging some output. Even 40 watts or 50 watts, that's a really bright light compared to most LED lights. So if I see something out there that's like $100 and it's under 40 watts, I think that's a little pricey considering what all is out there. And we'll take a look at some specifics here in a little bit. So output, that's really important to be able to shop, because you'll see some lights that are huge. I've got a light that is massive. It's like this big. It's a light panel, and its output is like 20 watts or maybe not even that. So it's really, really weak. So don't judge the lights by the size. That can fool you a lot of the time. The next thing is color. Now, traditionally, we use CRI, color rendering index, for testing the range of color when it comes to light. So essentially, this is essentially how well does the light reproduce all the different colors. So the sun is perfect, right? It's 100 CRI, which is the best. And anything that we can make usually isn't quite up there with the sun. So you want to look for that. But when it comes to LEDs, CRI isn't necessarily the best way to measure that. So it can have, you can have a light that has a 98 CRI, but it still is green or magenta. So you want to make sure you keep an eye out for that, and that you're you keep that in mind. So a better standard, which is becoming much more popular, luckily, is TCLI. So this is similar to CRI. 100 is perfect, 0 is garbage, useless, nothing. And you want to look for that. So more and more manufacturers are starting to add that to their lights, which is really, really helpful. So a couple tips when it comes to this: look for TCLI first. Then if you can't find that, look for CRI. That'll at least tell you it's not complete garbage. If a light has 0 CRI even information, chances are it's a pretty terrible light, which you can still get by with, but just be prepared for some potentially rough color that you'll need to use gels to correct. So that is output and color. Next is color temperature. So are we going for a light like the one I'm using right now, which is a 5500 Kelvin light, which is roughly going to match daylight, or a more tungsten 3200 color temperature, or bicolor? Now, before I get into bicolor, we need to keep in mind that LED, there is no standards out there right now when it comes to video and photo lights. So you can have 8 lights that are all 5600 Kelvin daylight, and they're completely different all over the place. So you really need to keep that in mind and try to stay within one brand, or even better, within one model type, if you're going to purchase several lights for use together. Especially if you're going to have 2 key lights that are going to mix, make sure they're pretty much the exact same brand and the exact same model. That'll really help. So you got to be careful with that. Going on to bicolor, that's more and more popular, and bicolor is getting so much better. So essentially having multiple color temperature settings, so you can dial it in. And for those of you out there shooting weddings, if I were you, every single one of my lights would be bicolor, because you're going to be shooting in a living room with natural light and big windows, and then you're going to turn around and shoot at like a vanity, them doing makeup for the wedding, and it's going to be mixed in super gnarly or just incandescent light. So you want to have that bicolor option so that you can quickly on the fly make those changes to match the environment. So bicolor is great. It's kind of tricky these days to figure out if it's worth it for the rest of us, those of us not doing weddings who don't regularly need to be changing the temperature of the color, because often, and this used to be almost always the case, you would have a bicolor light, so it's shot 3200 and 56 and a mix in between. But when you went from, essentially half the LEDs would be one temperature and the other half would be another temperature, meaning if it was a 100 watt light, you're probably only going to be getting 50 watts on either end, if that makes sense. So that's really, really rough. But these days, the technology is getting much better. They're able to have this same or similar output across the whole range. But that's something to keep in mind. If you see a light and you see it has alternating colored little LED chips, you might be wary of that if it's kind of an older or slightly more affordable light. Just be willing or ready to lose half the output at daylight or tungsten right in the middle. It should be full output. The next one is power options, and I think a lot of us forget about this. So let's hop over to webcam land and talk about what you want to look for. So this is a light that I really love. It's the Aperture H198, and it has on the back typical Sony MPF style batteries. It can also open this little door here, and if you're in a pinch, let's say all the batteries blew up on the plane, or that's a terrible example, but something terrible could happen, or they could be damaged or forgotten, you can run over to Walgreens and buy a bunch of AA's. The thing I don't like about this light is there's no way to plug in external like wall AC power. I have to get an adapter maybe to interface with this, but there's not just a little jack that I can plug in. So I usually look for that, because if I'm doing a sit-down interview, or all you corporate guys know exactly what I'm talking about, you want to be able to plug this light in and let it just run. And you want to have it running through setup, and when you're shooting the interview, no batteries, because you never know when these are going to turn off on you. So that's something to look for. Definitely look for some different power options. Also, just several of them. So this light, the Aperture Lightstorm Mini 20D, which I have a review of these coming out soon. Awesome little lights. They have two things that really bug me, but otherwise they're incredible. This comes with several different options. You've got MPF, you've got V-Lock or DTAP, cables for plugging directly into the wall, so many USB. You can power this thing off of a little USB battery. Really, really versatile. So just think about that. It gives you a lot of flexibility. You don't want to get a light that you can't plug in, and you want to pay attention to what kind of batteries, how many batteries, all that good stuff. Right on. Next up is beam angle. This one's really important. You want to pay attention to the specs in the description of whatever light you're looking at to find out if it's kind of a flood. So the widest would be something like 180, where pretty much anything on the sides or in front of the light is going to be lit, or if it's going to be more of a spot, 40 degree, 50 degrees, something like that. So with beam angle, usually I like to go for something a little more punchy, so kind of a medium to tight beam angle, because the wide stuff, let's say you're just going to light an interview, right? And you just have a 4x4 silk you're going to shoot the light through. Most of that output's going away. It's going off to the sides and all over the place. So if you have a spot, you're going to get most of your output right where you want it, in the center. Now, if you're going to be shooting, in a big open room and you just want light everywhere, that's a little different. But even with a spot, you could bounce it off of something and get that wider spread, or use a big diffusion sheet or something like that. So pay attention to beam angle. There's been several times where I bought a light and it was just so wide of a beam angle, it wasn't really useful for what I wanted. And that's where Fresnels come in too. So the same light we just looked at actually has, let's see if you guys can see it from here. You can kind of see I'm turning this little knob on the back, and it's moving the actual chip of the LED forward, closer and further from this little lens here. So that'll give you a really spotty light. This light right here is pretty much the most cuttable LED I've ever worked with. So when you can actually use the barn doors and get a harsh line. Not as harsh as, a typical hot light or the sun, but it's so much better than most LED lights. So that could really help to give you several options, where with the turn of a knob, you've got a big flood, or you've got a really high output spot right in the center. The next thing to consider, and this one is important for me more so these days than in the past, and we've got a lot of questions here. We'll definitely get to those, guys. I want to make sure we cover those. And some of these might be answered here in this discussion here, but built-in diffusion. So you want to look into that. The light right behind me and up here has a built-in milk diffusion. So it's a soft material that the light will shoot through and soften things up, but you can't remove it. So you want to be wary of those unless you want a very purpose-made light. I like that one because it drops down a really nice soft light and kind of hits me and the background, and that works really well, but you don't really want that if you can't change it. And the next one is modifiers. Modifiers are awesome. So this light, you really can't attach anything to the front. You can, obviously back it up, put it on a stand, and put something in front of it on a separate stand. But more and more, I'm really liking the idea of being able to put some kind of Bowen mount or some mount on the front of the light, like the 120D that we talked about earlier. Oh my, excuse me. So keep an eye out for some kind of Bowens mount. That's awesome, because that means for very little money, you can go out on Amazon and pick up a ton of awesome soft boxes, beauty dishes, all kinds of great stuff. So I really like to see that on a lot of these high output ones. The next one is tricky, and it's called Fringe. Well, I call it Fringe Color Bleed. So some of you guys might have seen this in the past, especially, and unfortunately this light does have it, and that is where you point the light at a background, you fire it up, and in the center everything looks good, but at the very, outside ring of the light, it looks like it's a different color. And this is due to the way the diodes are coded, without getting too nerdy. But essentially, the color looks great in the center, but toward the edges you get this funky color. So you'll get kind of like a nice daylight in the center, and then it'll be like this greenish yellow on the outside. So some lights suffer from that. It's hard to tell if that's going to be the case with the light you're getting from the outset when you're looking for lights, but definitely want to keep an eye on that when you pick it up. Next is the type of cooling. Once again, unfortunately, this light has a fan, and it is a variable speed. So at full tilt in a modestly, AC room, even not super warm, this thing will kick on and it'll start to cool down the light. So whenever I see fans, I double check, see what other people are saying about them. Another light that I really like, but it also has fans, is this guy, the Yangniu YN600. Yeah, fan right there. Great light though. This is probably the brightest light for $100 if you want like an LED panel. But it has a fan, so you got to be careful and think about where the light's going to be. The 120D that we looked at, the big guy, he has a silent fan, which is really great, and they're getting much better. So most lights you're good to go. I've got some lights I'll be reviewing from Came TV that have fans that are really quiet. So far, I've been very happy with their B30 and F55 lights. These are also really nice Fresnel little lights, and they're pretty quiet. So just pay attention to that, and don't be afraid of buying a big honking light, because often that's a big heatsink that'll help you avoid dealing with those fans. All right, type of cooling. The next one is does it have wireless or some kind of remote? Aperture's really good about most of the lights having this awesome remote that talk to each other, so you could build an entire set with all their different lights and be able to control the different remotes. Other ones have phone integration, which is really cool. So that might be something to consider depending on what kind of work you do. RGB, this is exploding right now. So RGB is finally coming to us in a form that doesn't suck. So we're going to see a lot more of that in the upcoming years. And there are some options now. Came TV just came out with some that they're either still developing or they are available now. So that I'm not exactly sure on. Yangnuo, that brand I just talked about, they have several RGB lights. I've talked about them in the past. So RGB is really handy. It's not super powerful right now, but you can get a couple RGB lights and they're really nice for backgrounds. So if you got a white wall behind your subject and you're doing an interview, just pop a little color in there. If you're doing a wedding and it's kind of a bland reception or something, just splash some color somewhere, and it really adds a lot to the shot. Right on. Next up is the LED diode type. So we've got several. Switching over to the other camera again. This one right here, hopefully this webcam focuses, is an LED bulb. So it's got like a little plastic bulb or bead over the actual diode. Most of the time, not always, but these will give you a more punchy light because it's kind of like imagine it like a tiny little lens on all of these. So that is, you know, not bad at all. I don't consider this like old tech, having the old ones, because we're so used to surface mount display stuff or surface mount diodes. And that's the next one, is surface mount diodes. And so what are these? I don't think I have one right next to me, unfortunately. But essentially, it's just mounted directly to, it's like, you guys know LED strips? It's essentially that, where you have just the little diode is soldered directly onto something. So this light right above me is a surface mount diode, SMD. And these often have a wider beam angle, unless they're directed somehow. So, and the reason for that is pretty simple. There's no bulb sitting on top of it that can direct the light forward. It's just kind of shooting light everywhere. So that's the third one is chip. And we're seeing a lot more of these really high-powered LED chips. So, or COB lights. So cluster on board, I think is that what that stands for. So the 120D has one. These are one of my favorites because they're really bright. They can take a ton of voltage, so that's what makes this whole bright light possible. But also it's most like a single source out of all the LED options. So if you hate the shadows, if you want something that's close to what we used to use, those RE Fresnel kits from back in the day, something like this is what you want to go for. This is just a high-powered version of that. The other little lights we just looked at also have that as well, from Came TV and the Aperture Mini 20D. So those are the different types, just some information there depending on what you're looking for. Finally, we got form factor. This is really important and really exciting right now. So we're used to, or at least I was used to back in the day, whenever you heard LED lighting, you thought of this, just an LED panel. Maybe you got some barn doors with it, and you had an on-off switch and maybe a dimmer. Like that's what I was working with, you know, whatever, 7-8 years ago. These days, we have so many purpose-made LED lights, which are really, really exciting. So one of them I'm using right above me, my Falcon Eyes 12 TD. So it's essentially a flex light alternative. I've done a video on those. They're amazing. I just got one in that's huge. It's a new, larger one. So those are amazing. You can tape them to the ceiling. You can fold them into a cylinder and put them somewhere. Throw them in your car. Gaff tape them all over the place. Clamp them all over the place. They're super lightweight, which is, I see a lot of people just use them like standard lights, but they love them because they're easy to carry. It's not like something like this that's gonna add some weight to your Pelican case. And we're getting the light kind of tubes or sticks where you can, little smaller pieces you can stick all over the place. So there's a lot of great different form factors. So don't think you have to get an LED panel. More and more I'm not liking these because, yeah, sure, it has a barn door, but that doesn't do anything for me because I can't really cut the light. And I'd prefer to have something that has a Bowens mount that I can put modifiers on, or some kind of Fresnel where I can mix and match things a little more easily. So I really don't recommend these as much anymore. They still have their uses, obviously, and there's a lot of great ones out there, but I'm loving these flexible mats. They're just so easy to work with and to pack and whatnot. So other things you can look for, just a couple little ones, is battery life, mounting options. Are you going to get one with a yoke, like so, where you're going to need to have a light stand, or do you prefer something like this Aperture guy where you've just got a 1/4, 20, or 3/8 that you can put on anything? Just a couple other things to consider. So now let's jump into these questions that I see whizzing by that I need to pay attention to. Let's see. 300 is a beast. I've 300D is on the way. I'm excited to play with that. It's going to be a lot of fun. Chip on board. There you go. Thank you, Break the Twitch. That's what I was trying to say. I see Bart's in. What's up, Bart? Is diffusion necessary? Can harsh light be used? From Zenith. Absolutely, you can use harsh light. I prefer softer light, like this right here is softer light. I wonder if I can take this off right here. I'm just going to pop it off and see if it's going to be brighter, obviously, but you'll notice a big difference in the shadows. See my glasses? I'm kind of getting some shadows in here. And I've got a smaller dot in my eye. Whereas if I just slap that diffusion on there, okay, now it's a lot softer. So I just prefer softer light. I love the way shadows look right there. They just kind of smoothly disappear into darkness instead of just a really harsh line. But there's still a place for harsh light. I use harsh light all the time on backgrounds. I'm not afraid to do that, but I don't like shadows all over the place. So yeah. All right. Can I talk about my light setup right here? Absolutely. Let's switch over to the webcam. Oops, that's Chrome. Yep, there we go. I'm just gonna grab this. So, oh my gosh, I'm doing this like backward. So I've got this light here. It is that falconized light. It is on a C-stand and on a grip arm. I'll try to show the back here. It's just on this little X bracket, mounts directly to the stand. And I also off that C-stand have my G7, which is what's making all this happen. And it's kind of a high key setup. So it's right, like this is what I see, guys, right? So camera, light right above it. That's y'all. What's up for those who are watching this in the after world? Falling apart here. Okay, so high key, right? So it's above, centered up, and in the above me. I could switch back to this camera, move it off to one side, and you would get a little more shadow on one side of my face. But because it's so dark here in the studio, I prefer to have it straight on. That way I kind of evenly light my face. This would be kind of a high-key beauty light, if you will, because it's pretty evenly lighting everything. I could also add a bounce kind of down here to fill in the undersides of my face, but that's what's kind of up with this current lighting setup. Oops, there we go. Really great light. It's really affordable too. So just search on YouTube for like flex light alternatives. You'll probably see my video there, and you can check those lights out. And I've got a big one of those coming in, a couple different style of like matte or flexible lights that I'm really excited about because they're just easy to move around. They're super lightweight and they're getting stupidly bright. So yeah. Yo, Nathan. Hello. Nice foam. Thank you. That's from Foam Factory or thefoamfactory.com. It's probably like the best stuff for the budget. Can I match the LS120D to the 120 or the Mini 20 to the 120D? Yes, we'll talk about that in the upcoming video because there's some differences in their lineup there, and yeah, we'll talk about that. It's an interesting topic that we'll get into. Young Neo YN300 Air or American H198. The 300 I think is a little brighter potentially. I can't remember. I think I talked about that in the past. Actually, for the Air, I wouldn't get the Air. I would get the H198 over the Air. So that's this guy right here. I have several of them and I love them in the studio. Slap a couple gels on here, boom, you've got some great lighting on your background. The Air, which I have up there, is not really that bright, so compared to this. So yeah, there you go. Bart, have you ever used Quasar lights? You had to shoot with them recently and you really want some. No, I haven't. I don't think I may have heard of that before. I'll have to check that out though. Any cheap lights similar to the RE M8? Try to remember the M8. Is that their Fresnel? Or no, is that the, no, I don't remember what that is. But let's look that up because I feel silly that I don't know what that is. M8. Okay, yeah. So an HMI essentially. Yeah, the Aperture 300D. I don't know what you mean by budget, but that's probably your best bet. Also, there's some interesting stuff coming out that I'll be showing in the near future, which will kind of compete with that as well. If you're looking for real cheap, just jump on eBay or Amazon and search for 100 or 150 watt video light, and you'll find a bunch of really, really bright lights. Yes, I will be, from Scott, I will be comparing the Aperture these two lights right here, because they're very similar and yet very different. So the Aperture Mini 20D and the Boltzmann Fresnels. They also have a lot of cool, bigger Fresnels that we'll be talking about. So that's cool stuff. Yes, that's the Aperture in my hand, the Mini 20. Have ever thought about sharing my color grades from Zenith? I have done a video on color correction in the past. I'll probably do an updated version of that. It's one of those things, like, I don't think I'll ever finish, even come close to getting it right. But I'm constantly figuring out, like, wow, I should have been doing that for the last forever. Okay. Digging the new hair situation. Thanks, Chad. Appreciate it. I'm digging it too. I cannot look at a mirror in days and not have to worry about it. Do I use the plastic diffusion screens that come with lights from Jesse? Usually not. So here's an interesting thing. Most of those lights, you know, they come with like a terrible orange thing that snaps to the front, or what looks like a diffused little panel. A lot of people think that diffused panel, myself included in the past, was actual diffusion. And we all say, well, this is garbage. It doesn't diffuse at all, and it's too close to the light. Well, that's not what that filter is for. It's actually kind of like what's called a Hampshire filter. And it's designed to let as much light through, but turn all those little lights into one source. So, you know, they come with lights like this. You got all these tiny little lights, and they all cast their own shadows. You put that, what looks like almost like a crystal-y filter on the front of it, and it turns into one source. You can walk in front of it, and you won't get that terrible LED light shadow. So that's what's up with that. Any plans on doing gels versus diffusion from Zenith? Probably not. I don't think... in general, I'm going more with just silk diffusion. It's easier to work with and travel with. It doesn't get damaged as easily. But for hot lights, or if you want something more rigid, diffusion gels are great. And you can cut them up in nice real sizes. What power of light matches the 120D? If we're talking in watts for like LED, I'm not going to talk about equivalents, but actual wattage is around 100 to 120 watts. Yeah. Maybe a little less, but yeah, 100 to 120. What is the output of the Mini 20D? I want to say around 20 watts. Let's hop over to Aperture and figure that out. I'm going to show you guys what I'm seeing. There's that 300D. I should have a review out on that shortly. There's the Mini 20D. Search for watt. Come on, baby. Feature specs. That's what I want. 30 watts. Okay, there it is. Boom. 30 watts. And there's that TLCI we were talking about earlier. You want to look for that right there. I don't know if my mouse is showing up, but right there. Beam angle. So 20 to 80. That's really, really solid for a range. So yeah, color temperature. Yeah, that's where things get kind of interesting on this light. They're also showing the two different. I really like the. I've been playing a lot with their bicolor one. It's really, really solid. Cool. So gonna look back over here. See what's going on with the old comments. Yeah, so we talked about, Scott, we talked about brightness earlier on. Lux is another one I didn't mention, but is a good way to measure brightness. Usually Lumens is a good way to go. It seems to be the most consistent. And what I've been doing is, like, going back to this, let's find their yeah, so they're using Lux. Actually, I think Lux and Lumens, is that the same thing? I think that's the same thing, right? It's just a different LUM versus LUX, or is there a difference? Yeah, another one is that I didn't mention is foot candles. So that's another standard one. Looks like Aperture is trying to show as many of them as possible. But this is what I'll look at. So like 0.5 meters. They don't have a 3 meter. But what you can do is kind of start to get a feel for how bright these are. And then when you see lumens or lux at 0.5 meters on this one is 40,000, then you'll kind of know, all right, that's where that's at. And over time, that's where you begin to develop an idea of how bright these are. Okay. At what distance, though? It's just a measurement of light output. So what I try to look for is the longer distances. So if I can, I try to look for a 3 meter. A lot of the time, Aperture is giving us up to a meter, which is a good distance for like an interview. You might, that's what, 3.3 feet, right? You guys that do metric can help me out with that. So you look at those. I like to see what they give you for the longer distances, just because a lot of the time they won't share that because it won't look good on a spec sheet. Tony's saying, when I review the 300D, how about also their space light? I've been meaning to buy the space light because that looks really slick. Interested in what kind of light that would give you. Yeah, I have a couple plans for what I want to do with that light. I want to try lighting outside in daylight, or during the daytime, because that's so bright. I want to bounce it off of my giant living room ceiling, which is white. So I want to see what you could do if you just walk into an office, you're about to light an interview. Often you'll get something like this where like I'm nicely exposed, but without the light behind me, it's just going to be blackness, right? So it'd be great to walk into a studio or someone's home. They're doing makeup for a wedding and you're a wedding guy. Slap that 300D on the ceiling. You'll get this beautiful kind of soft light that'll hit everything, and then add a keyed light. I think that'd be really interesting to play with. Or another nice thing about having these super bright lights is the further away the light gets from you, the less soft it becomes. So the closer the light is, the softer it gets, okay? So this light is fairly close to me. I can reach out and touch it. I always try to get my lights right up to the edge of the frame, just out of frame, to get that extra softness. Another way to make things soft is to make them bigger. So this is a smallish square light above me, but if I had a giant 6x6, that's going to be so much softer, even with the same amount of output. Okay, so stay with me. So if you want to light somebody who's sitting on a stool and you want a floor to 2 feet above their head shot, that means you're going to have to be really far away and you're not going to be able to get your light really close. But if you have a crazy bright light, you can have an 8x8 sheet of diffusion or a 6x6, shoot a bright light through it, and it'll look like the light is only a few feet away from them. So bigger equals softer, or closer equals softer. So, yeah, that's correct. So just keep that in mind too. Any recommendations for an all-purpose gel pack to match 4600 and 3200 when using a 5600 light? You have a couple options. You could buy that pack I talked about, which has a whole bunch of goodies from Digital Juice. You could also just hop on Amazon or B&H, and I think Roscoe has a couple correction gels kits, I think is what they call them. Or you can just go to anywhere on the internet or a local photography or rental place and get just a whole bunch of CTO, because you're trying to warm it up to 46 or 32. So great question, Dave. I would just get a whole bunch of 1/8, quarter, half, full, and double CTO. And over time, you'll build this collection, and then you'll be ready for any scenario. Dixon, completely off topic. I feel like you once mentioned in a past stream getting a hold of anamorphic lenses. If so, I can't wait. Yeah, I have the SLR Magic little 1.33x. So it's not a true 2x. but I want to play with that because I think that's really interesting. And then I'm probably going to rent their actual anamorphic lens from SLR Magic. I'm not going to buy one because that'd be silly. But for my upcoming guide, I'm going to do a whole giant section on anamorphic on the GH5. So that'll be a lot of fun. Acrylic Studio says digital juice butterfly frame 8x8 diffusion. That's what I want next. Yeah, that sounds awesome. And you can build those too. It's just getting something like what you just described is great because it's easy. Is the Falcon Eyes light I'm using dimmable? Yes, it has a small little box that I have plugged into the wall, and it gives me a dimmer switch and an on-off switch. And you can also power it off of V-mount batteries. Or with an adapter MPF. So it's a pretty solid light. It's a little bit out of reach right now, so I won't grab it, but I think right now I'm roughly at 50% brightness, and it has a layer of diffusion on it. I can't answer that question. Alex asking about if the aperture of 120D is equivalent to a 1,000-watt halogen. I would love, and maybe someone has done this, but a legitimate, like, all right, cut the BS. Everybody's saying, our light is just like having 18 HMIs. And someone just needs to sit down, go to a rental house, get all the lights, and actually tell us what's what. Because I don't know. But I know people throw around that kind of marketing all the time. I have not. So Calvin's saying, have I tried the multi-lighting setup with the H198, which is this light from Aperture. And what's cool about these is on each side there are little cold shoes, and they come with a little attachment that you have right here, so you can link them together. So in theory, you could connect a ton of them and make a larger panel. It's a great point. At one point I was going to do a video on like taking 4 of these, and you could like stack them together and have a little key light and then an extra 1 or 2 for background lights, hair lights, things like that. So if you think that's interesting, maybe I should just do that video. I don't know why I decided not to. But yeah, great point. So you could buy 1 to get you started, build on that, yada, yada, yada. All right, so let's see. Yeah, I remember building dimmer boxes too, Bart, for all those old tungstens. All right. I'm going to scroll up a little bit here, see if I missed any questions that should be answered. What Shotgun microphone am I using right now? A Rode NTG4. Not necessarily something I would buy for this purpose, but it's what I'm using. And then this little pop filter dealio. Thoughts on camera lights or really portable lights when doing run and gun? Almost no setup time. Yeah, so here's some things to consider. When you have the light right on the camera, it's going to look kind of like this, except that lights is really small. So remember a little bit ago we talked about to make something softer, you need to add diffusion or have the light be bigger or closer. So if you have like this light on top of your camera and you're filming interviews, it's going to be a tiny little light, so you're not getting much diffusion, and often they don't have good diffusion. So you're not going to get much soft light. It's going to look like your headlights at it on a deer. It's going to look bad. So you have a couple and it's also straight on, and that's where it looks really, really bad. So you can soften it up. You could get a small, really lightweight soft box that would go on top. That would help immensely. You could also put this on a monitor friction arm, and instead of having it like this right on top of the camera, offset it and tilt it maybe a little bit, and that would give you kind of a nice light if you're willing to put up with that kind of setup. Otherwise, what I like to do a lot of the time is get one of these light mats that weigh almost nothing, throw it on a stand and with a battery, and then you can just pick the whole thing up and tear around with it and get really nice light without having to have a huge setup. Have I seen the relamp from Vision Smith? This is from Bart. Yes, I have. I love the idea. I just don't think it makes a lot of sense financially, because aren't those like stupidly expensive? I'd love to see someone come up with something a little more affordable. I'm sure it works great, but it seems like a lot of money for bringing those old lights back to life, which, again, I love the idea of, but yeah. Let's see. So yeah, Hot Rod Hippie, you can skip a little bit further back. I showed how I have everything lit right here. Any other questions, guys? And we can move off of lighting. We can also just hop into anything. Any suggestions for cheap lights to light video my studio? In your studio, Yellow Rose Farm. To figure out a budget. I've been meaning to do a video or another live stream, probably just a video though, on what should be in your light kit. So what are the bare minimums? So you want as bright a light as you can afford for your key, something that is very versatile. A couple little lights, you don't have to spend a lot on these for your backgrounds and things like that. But it doesn't take too much. If you're on a really tight budget, you can pick up a cheap softbox kit on Amazon. They usually come with CFL bulbs, but you can also buy those LED bulbs I've talked about in the past and throw those in there, and you can get some great results. What software am I using to stream? OBS. I don't know why I still have this window open. Let's go like this. Probably makes more sense. Thanks for the reminder, Kevin. And Brian has a question in one moment. What shotgun mic am I using? Rode NTG4. Can you do a show on lightning dark-skinned individuals? Yeah, that sounds like a good topic. Often, if right out of the gate, I would say, again, soft light, so you don't have harsh shadows. And shadows on a pasty white guy like me won't be too bad, but on someone with a darker skin is going to be almost, really, really dark. So having softer light, enough output, and lighten up the background. I think that's a big problem too, is I look okay against this dark background because I'm pasty white, but if you have someone with darker skin, that's not going to work. So make sure you lighten up things around people with darker skin. All right. Wow. Okay. Having trouble recording audio outside due to air noise. How do you suggest I minimize it? From Zenith. Definitely get a dead cat, dead kitten, dead whatever. So a sock that'll go on there with all the fuzzies. That does such a good job. It's amazing. So if you don't know which one to get, or you just need a new microphone, like the Rode Video Micro comes with one, and it works so well. So if you're vlogging outside, that's the microphone to get, because you've got that little sucker on there and you can be tearing around in the wind and you're fine. Color matching LED, any tips? Is it best to stick with one manufacturer? Are higher end lights more something more try to color, harder to color, easier to color? One easy way-ish is to get something white, point your light at it, film a little bit, switch the lights out, and compare the color, and then use gels to correct one or the other if they're off. I would recommend using the same manufacturer and even the same model number if possible. So sometimes I was emailing someone some lights in different companies, they look completely different even though they're both 56. So, but yeah, gels can do wonders for matching lights. And just remember, you got warm it up with CTO, cool it down with CTB, plus and minus green, get rid of the shifts. Yeah, eBay is great for stuff. I've bought several lights on eBay. Just got to be careful. Budget green screen studio, I would get a green screen, preferably paper. You could do cloth too. I just hate dealing with cloth. It gets so wrinkly the first time you store it, unless you stretch it real taut. Something like what I have behind me would work. This is like it's kind of like a 5-in-1 reflector. It like folds up. You can get those in green and it stretches out pretty nicely. And then just get a ton of soft boxes for lighting. So like a cheap kit on Amazon, because you need to evenly light that thing. But yeah, that would do a lot. Roto lights, any future reviews from Calvin? Probably not. I haven't checked in to see what's new. I know they have that round light and some other ones, but I feel like the last couple times I've looked at their offerings, there's just better stuff with more output out there. But I could be wrong. Pick it up. Bart says, I'm thinking about picking up a few additional cameras for my live show. Been eyeing the Panasonic G7. Can't remember if you've used the G7. Any thoughts on it? Yes, this is the G7. It is awesome. It's I think the cheapest, best 4K camera. Interchangeable lenses, 4K, clean HDMI out. So even though it sucks that, it doesn't have headphone jack and you can't hit record and have an HDMI signal being sent and the other little quirks, hook it up to your computer or an external recorder and you're done. That video I just did on the multicam Apollo unit, you could hook up 4 of those things and you'd have a super budget, super high quality setup, and it sends 4K or downscales the 4K to 1080 and sends that on the HDMI. So even if you're capturing at 1080, you're getting a 4K jammed into that resolution wise. So lots of pixel love, and that's an awesome camera. I love it. It's really affordable. I recommend it all the time. Yeah, so sorry. I got a little excited there. It's a great camera. All right. Would you ever light a person with 2 different temperatures? Did that recently. Didn't really work out with skin tones. Color grading was not from EPOS Films. Yeah, that's really tricky. I would, if I were going to do that, I would really try to make sure that the colors are separate. So if you have colors that are just slightly off, like let's say a 5600 and a 5000, that might not work well. It'll just look wrong. But if you go with 3200 Kelvin and then you set your white balance for that and then have a cooler light over here and, it's pretty different, that might work. Or really get it out of the way. Just use it as a rim. Don't do 2 like this. There's some scenes in Minority Report where I really love how they did 2 different color temperatures. Or just Google, mixed color temperature lighting, and you'll find some really cool examples. So it can be done, but it does take a lot of finesse to get just right. Albert asked about Felix lights. I haven't played with them, but I've seen them at NAB and, tried them, but not in a production environment, and they look super, super solid. But I've not used them in the studio. I have enough lights for interviews, but I need a good key light for wedding reception. So this is from Linda. Sorry, I keep doing that. I keep getting stuffy down here. I would recommend probably some high power light like the Aperture 120D or 300D that you can bounce off of something. It's just going to be hard. I'm guessing you're talking about covering big groups of people. Otherwise, a bunch of these flexible mats in different parts of the room would do a great job because they're lightweight, easy to travel with, and they do spread light out really nicely. Which is my favorite? Came TV, Boltzmann, or the Aperture Mini 20D. They're both different, and they both do different things really well. So I'm gonna do the review separately, and then I'll do a comparison. And essentially, one is better at kind of color, and the other one is better at what you do with the output, whether that be wide, cutting it, spot. So we'll cover that in the future. Yeah, I should have mentioned that Elgato solution. Thanks for that, Flood of Sins. Tesfa says you have she I can't really tell from here, I'm sorry. Wedding coming up this Sunday. I don't have any light. Would it be wise to order one on Amazon? If so, which one would you suggest under $200? I would figure out where the locations are on this upcoming wedding. If it's going to be pitch black at the reception, then you might want to get something under $200. I would maybe look at some Yongnuo stuff like this. This is $100. You can get 2 of these. These are some of the brightest under $100 or $99 lights. 2 of them, hit them on the ceiling or something white, and they're pretty bright. Okay. How does a new haircut feel? Awesome. Thank you, Yellow Rose. Nice and breezy. I'm getting a hissing sound from my Rode VideoMic Pro, my Panasonic, but other cameras I don't get it. Any solutions on that? Try to turn the volume or input levels on your camera as low as you can and see if that helps at all. Sometimes the preamps are really bad and that gets you in trouble. Could you use Philip Hue light bulbs for lighting? I know people do it. TLD, Morrison, first name Jonathan. He uses them for lots of tech guys do that. They use those RGBs. You might run into some issues depending on your camera settings though. So a lot of the time you'll get this weird strobing. Pretty much all the lighting I have in this entire house is crap for video because it gets that weird slow strobe. So I try to avoid that. A better option, and super cheap, would just get some kind of normal light and then throw a gel on it, and you're done. Right. Let me move this down here. That might be easier. What are you listening to with the headphones? I'm listening to myself. I'm not even going to try to mess with it, but essentially I have them on so I can hear myself, hear sound effects. If I'm playing something on the computer, I can hear it, make sure the levels aren't all crazy. All right. I have not tried the mini dome from Aperture. That looks really awesome though. Hello from Russia. How's it going, past? Any good rigs for the G7? I'm not a big rig guy, but I do like cages, and Small Rig has a G7 cage for like $70. That's probably what I'd go for. And the HDMI connection sucks on that camera, so having that little HDMI lock is really handy. Compact diffusing LED panels for a desk setup with limited space. You're also facing the monitor. Okay, for that, and I've got a video coming up on this I'm really stoked about, essentially how to turn your desk into a little YouTube studio, if you will, and do something similar like this, but on a budget. And let's go over to Chrome, Amazon. A lot of you guys already know about this light, but rip. This guy right here is probably what I'd go for. Whoa, prices. Oh, battery, right. So it should be, yeah, $32-ish. It comes in two forms, kind of a square or a, wide light. You could get one or two of these, and that should work pretty well. I want to try getting two of these wider ones like this and put one on either side of the monitor, and that could be good, or three, one on top, one on each side, and that could help out, and it's really affordable. So you could probably get away with trying one. Let's see what kind of output we're looking at on these. I can't remember. It's probably like 18, 20 watts. It's just, this is what I do all the time. I'll search for watts on the page, and we're not getting any love. Yeah, I'm not seeing output, but might be able to find it on their website. So I would do something like that. I think that would work pretty well for a setup like that. Right. Yellow Rose, what do I think of this Canon T3i? Is it still worth buying? Probably not. If you're in that budget range though, check out Sony's other cameras. So Sony A5000, their NEX 5N, stuff like that. There's some others I'm not thinking of at the moment. Older Panasonic stuff. That would be what I would probably do. Any suggestions? Lighting up a green screen on a budget? That's a tough one. Just lots and lots of soft light. So you could get just a whole butt ton of like cheap Amazon soft boxes. All right, so here's the deal. If I was doing it on a budget, I'd make sure I'm a little further away from the background, and I would go out and buy like, I don't know, 8 to 15 of those like $20 soft boxes and just light the crap out of that background. And then you'll be able to get it exposed evenly. And that's probably what I would go for. Something like that. Lots of lights will help because you'll get it nice and even. Zenith says the A61 5100 is godlike for budget people. Great recommendation. I would concur. Predictions on the A7S III or A9S. I have no idea. Hopefully a flip out screen. Hopefully just being a more stable, let's grow up a little bit and figure out our menu system. Maybe some higher, 10-bit maybe? Something. They got to answer the GH5. But then again, the GH5, Panasonic's always kind of given us more at the low end than Sony. So I have no clue. That's a great question, though. Best light for beginners, depending on your budget. The cheapest thing I like is that $20 softbox with an LED bulb. Bam, you're in business. So I've done a video on that setup. Works really well. From there, something like this guy is great. $99 for a really bright LED light, dimmable, good stuff. That's the YN600. That's around $99. Okay. What's up, Tom? How you doing? Tom Antos. Thoughts on the A7S III since the GH5 came out with impressive specs. I don't know. It really depends on what that camera is going to be like. I'm loving that GH5 though. That is a sick camera. It's really hard to go back to anything that isn't 10-bit after that. Do I prefer to record interviews into camera or audio recorder? Most of the time, I use a recorder and the camera. So audio comes into the recorder. That's the master for audio. From there, I'll output it back to the camera. And in post, if everything's cool on the camera or good, we'll use that. But if something went wrong on the camera, I've got it all good to go on the recorder. Any suggestions for diffusing a hard camera light? So something like this, you could buy just a diffusion gel or diffusion filter, so something kind of papery. Cut it so it's close to double the width, and then tape it right here, and it'll kind of create a little kind of flexible diffuser, and that'll really help. Something like a thin piece of paper, something like that. Going with it rigid where it'll kind of bubble out works really well. My thoughts on lavalier microphones. I try to go with shotguns just because I love the isolation, but in just the angle, you can control it more. But if you're on the move, you got no choice. So I have no problem with using those. Or do both, right? Shotgun into the left, lav into your right, and you're good to go. Have I used the Tri 8C? I have the Tri 8 non-color version. The Tri 8S, I really like it. The Tri 8C, I'm sure, is just as good, just it won't have the same output. So if you want some serious punch, you got to go for the S, not the Tri 8C. So thanks for that. That's a great question, Alex. Sydney, Short Film School says he has a YN600. The fan isn't bad at all. Yeah, I would agree. If you get really close, you might hear it. And I just say that because I know some people get so bent out of shape about fans on lights. They're getting so much better, but a couple of those older models out there will get you in trouble, potentially. Am I using the Aperture Space Light from Tom Antos? Not yet. I've been meaning to pick one up. I don't really have much need for one. We were talking earlier about bouncing like a 300D off of a white ceiling or something like that. Often I prefer the bounce because it's a little more controlled. But I love the idea of those space lights, being able to mount that maybe horizontally and just splash light everywhere or drop it down like they have in all their marketing material. That looks really slick. It's like $50, right? Maybe I'll show what we're talking about here. Oops, I'm on a different browser for this, so that's why all my good stuff isn't showing up here. Lighting, would it be under lighting? I'd imagine so. There it is. Oh, okay, that's with the 300D. I'm like, what? $1,150 for the space light? That's ridiculous. Show me just your space light, please. Well, maybe you guys already said it over here. I don't know. It's not much, so I want to pick one up. Cool. Right. Hey, I'm starting a YouTube channel, and I don't know what camera I should buy under 170. Want to have amazing footage. I wish there was something good at that price range. You might find something in an upcoming video. I'm doing 7 cameras under $300 that are actually worth checking out, so stay tuned for that. If you have a phone, that might be your best bet. Just get an app that lets you have lots of manual control and go to town. What if you're in a mixed lighting environment, windows and overhead and video lights? It's a great question. What I try to do is figure out what's dominating the environment and go with that. So if you're in a room and there's massive windows, shut all the other lights off and use your video lights to match the daylight. If you're in a room where there's maybe a little bit of daylight but lots of incandescent bulbs, match those, close up the window. And you just kind of balance it out. Sometimes you're going to just have to live with it mixed. Often I'm okay with having some daylight spots here and there, but I always think when you have your camera set to daylight and there's random tungsten color, I don't really care for that look, but you know, to each their own. But try to figure out who's winning the battle when it comes to color temperature and join the winning side. Oh man, so stuffy. Oh, we are over time, folks. But that's okay. Got a couple questions in here somewhere. Lots of questions. Have I tried the fake Airy Fresnels? I have not. I've been so tempted to, but there's other guys who have covered those and they suck. But oh, are you talking about like the real ones or the LED ones? The LED ones I hear are terrible. The cheap Chinese knockoff real hot lights, real fake hot lights, aren't bad from what I've heard. Get red heads. I've heard people burning houses down with red heads. If we're thinking of the same thing, those wicked cheap hot lights. So just be careful with those, like cables melting and walls exploding. Recommend an audio interface for use on a desk for narration with XLR. So, I gotta get it. Hang on, I'm gonna grab 2 because I have 2 that I really dig and they work really well. So 1 second, please bear with me, guys. It's right over here on this other desk. Oh my goodness. There's one. One of these days I'll clean this place up and figure out where everything is as I knock my background around. Okay, so here's one. This is probably the best cheap one. It's from Behringer. Model number is UM2. 1 XLR input. I think that's all you needed, right? But yeah, really great little guy here. 30-ish bucks. And then the other one is the Mackie. It's like $100. I really love it. I wish it was nearby, but I can't seem to figure out where I put it. But it has 2 XLR inputs, $99. Blackjack. It's called the Mackie Blackjack, and that's awesome. Great little interface. All right, folks. We got a lot of good questions going on. Let's go for a little longer. See if I can catch up on these. I need a daily show. I don't know if I could come up with content for a daily show. Yeah, careful with those redheads, because they're hot and they can burn places. Scroll up a little bit. I feel like I keep missing big sections of questions. Getting the G7 tomorrow. Awesome, Nora. It's great camera. Love it. Thank you for the kind words, MEK. Been filming live events recently and I've been having problems. Want to display a live feed of my camera while recording. This live feed is a projector with an audience. What would be best? You might run into some latency stuff there, but you should be able to go HDMI to HDMI, unless you said something about SDI, in which case like a $30 SDI to HDMI or vice versa would work well. Using dynamic mics on a boom mic, bad idea? Question mark. Try it. Maybe, maybe not. I don't know if this boom mic is moving around or if you're gonna have it fixed. Nice pop filter holder. I'm gonna find the link to this, but I love it because I can do this and it all moves together. I've got the kind that clips on, and I'm constantly, every time I move the mic, I have to readjust it. So this one works pretty well. And I can remove it and put my mic out of frame and shoot a video here, which is also nice. And one of the reasons I have a shotgun here. Yeah, we're doing weekly shows, Scott. So every single Wednesday, I'm going to try to do a live show. I don't know if you were talking about like a real show, but I've been enjoying these live streams. Hopefully you guys have too. I've enjoyed it. It's been a lot of fun. It's also a great way to make sure I'm getting to these questions, because it's really hard to handle YouTube comments and messages and emails and tweets and Facebook messages and all that kind of stuff. Any advice for recording audio outside if it's windy? Definitely a dead cat, and also a lav with a little dead, whatever that would be called. Have a couple extra audio sources. Even if you're recording one person, try to have two microphones on them. That way if something goes hairy on one of them, then you're okay. Best way to take photos of a live dark concert with concert lights going everywhere? That's a great question. I've never filmed I've done some live work with music, but nothing crazy. And those, I mean, it's tough. It's really tough. I would maybe have something set to automatic, like have your aperture take over and have one of the 3 options for exposure be automatic to help you with those changes. Gonna get the YN360 light strip. Thanks for your LED videos. I think gives me most options. Yeah, it's a great light. It's not super bright, but if you have a shot kind of like this, you'd be good to go for sure. And the RGB is cool to have as well. Best cheap lav. Great question. I've working on a video for that. But let's hop over to the good old Amazon real quick. There's one that I have used and like for sure, and then I'm going to test a whole bunch of other ones. If you're really on a budget, these actually aren't bad. These these guys right here are pretty, these like iPhone. This one right here, JK. I'll drop a link in the comment section, but this one isn't bad. Well, folks, I think it's about time to wrap up, unfortunately. Awesome live stream today. By that I mean it's great having you guys. Lots of good questions. So please hang out with me next week. We're going to do the same thing as many Wednesdays as I possibly can. We're going to rock another video tomorrow involving a sweet iPhone app that is amazing and gives you features that most monitors won't for monitoring your camera. So that'll be a lot of fun. And then, of course, fresh videos every Tuesday, Wednesday, more live streams. I hope you guys have a fantastic evening. And thank you again for joining me. Always a blast. Have a good one, and we'll see you next time.